What does sexual assault, polygamy, and COVID have in common? Well, what they have in common is my guest that I have on today. Yeah, Annalisa. And I've been practicing saying that. Annalisa has a great story that is riddled with a lot of interesting stories and fun things that we're going to get into. But really, it's about her resilience in life. And Annalisa grew up Mormon and went into the ex-Mormon space and is now Christian. And so we're going to get into her story today. Annalisa, thanks for being on Jesus for Mormons.
Thanks so much for having me here. Yeah, so it's a kind of interesting topics, but definitely makes up the majority of my story today. Yeah.
All right, perfect. So where is it that you grew up?
So I grew up in Southern Texas. Everyone likes to say San Antonio, South Texas, but take 4 hours south of that, and that's where I grew up, next to the border. My family's Mexican-American predominantly. On my mom's side, I'm first generation American. My dad's side, I'm second. So most of my family came from Mexico. And yeah, we, generationally have a lot of deep roots in Mexico. And I'm actually living in Mexico now, right now.
Oh, okay. And where are you at in Mexico?
Yeah, I live in the Yucatan Peninsula, in one of the safest cities in Mexico, Merida. It's pretty awesome, but the food here is okay. I'm still used to the northern Mexican food. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. All right. And for those of you who might be listening to this later, it's in January. How hot is it there in January?
Oh, it's like in the 80s, it's like pretty high 80s. So we can get in the pool, no problem, and really enjoy it. Especially when we're walking on a hot day, we're going to jump in the pool afterwards.
There you go. I like a little winter heat.
Yeah.
I can definitely appreciate that. So tell me a little bit about your upbringing. I mean, we have a lot of really controversial topics to go over in this interview, personal to you. What are some of the things that most stand out to you just from growing up, and what might make your story interesting and unique to the people listening?
I mean, there's so much to go, I guess, into. I mean, I'm a early millennial, so I'm getting to my 40s, and there's been a lot of things in the growing up in the Mormon church early years that I experienced. Sexual abuse was one of those in the church. And yeah, it's been a lot of different things that I grew up with. My mom was a convert to the church. She would convert when she was in her youth. And then my dad was a generational Mormon. So he was third generation. And so I'm fourth on his side. So there's a lot to unpack, because that's all I knew in my life was Mormonism.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So you grew up active. Were your parents super active, not very active? Where did they fall on the, Mormon activity spectrum?
Well, my dad was always very, very passionate about his religion. So you could say he was extreme in his beliefs, and that kind of leads into later on in my story. But my dad was very active in elders quorum, very high in leadership positions. My mom is equally the same. She was very much in primary. Always, she has a very beautiful voice. So her voice is like primary president all day long. And we had 6 kids in the family, so it really fit into her niche in life. And it was really cool to see those 2 leadership positions. And then all my extended family was LDS. So that's all we knew. That's all my cousins knew. We lived around tons of family. Hispanics, we have a lot of family. So all of them were Mormon. And yeah, it was very, I guess you could say, a bubble in a way.
Yeah, definitely. It kind of reminds me of growing up in the church. It's, for me at least, families had certain pews that they would sit at, right? And you knew that the Smith family sits on the fourth, far right, 5th row back from the front, right? And then this family sits here and this family sits here. Would you say that your family kind of followed that same thing, or were they
Yeah, for
Maybe it's a
sure.
little
I mean,
different in
it's like it's everyone had their spot. If you took someone else's spot, it wasn't like you're mad at them or like they were mad at you for taking their spot. You just sat where you always sat. We always sat in the middle on the side. So if we needed an easy exit, we could get out because we had 6 kids. And then sometimes it wasn't feasible to sit on the side, so we'd sit in the middle. But typically it was the middle front, if that makes sense. And I mean, most people understand what that kind of is because we're not in the back where you're just like running out all the time because we're sitting down and if we're misbehaving, we're going to get bows afterwards. So, like that was our typical Sunday routine. Like, for example, like we would misbehave at church when there's 6 kids. And so at like after every church, it was like, who's going to get spanked first? And so we would actually, at the end of it all, we would like push each other down to be in line who would get spanked first because we didn't want to be the one spanked to last. And so that was kind of our Sunday routine growing up. A lot of the time was like just we misbehaved and we were rowdy and we were loud kids. That was just about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people are probably going back down memory lane of growing up in the church. And when you say middle, everyone knows what you mean.
Yeah.
When you say right and left, it's like everyone knows the layout of a chapel, which is kind of fun. So you touched on this a little bit, and I want to just like dive right into a really hard topic, which I think is important to talk about. You talked about sexual abuse within the church, and we've seen like especially recently a lot of cover-ups, especially with Boy Scout stuff and that, things being changed with that. I just kind of want to talk about it because I think it's important for people out there to kind of hear your story about that. So can you kind of walk us through that story and what happened there?
Yeah. So we were, in the ward that we've always been in. We had a high counselor, man named Maldonado. I'll just say his last name. I don't really know his first name. I forget it because it's been a while. I think he just recently got out of prison after serving over 20 years and for sexual assault to several children, specifically little girls. And so what happened is that he started doing work for my family. Because in the church, you go to people that in church to help you with like electrical, plumbing, whatever, right? So he was a contractor and my parents hired him on for a couple jobs at the house. And that's when the abuse started occurring. It was to me specifically since I was like around the age that he was usually, I didn't know this. My parents didn't know this beforehand, but he had sexually abused 3 other little girls in the same church, in the same ward. And the leaders knew about this and they didn't tell any of the members. And so my parents had no idea letting this man in the house doing contracting work. And my parents owned a business. So, there was a lot of things that played into hand. Like we weren't always being watched by my parents and my parents were, they're trying to build a business and we had a housekeeper who watched us. And so it was during that time where he started that sexual abuse and it was very shameful as any person can say, as a child, you always think it's your fault. Like you're the one that's doing it. For some reason it's your fault. And so that's what happened for several months on my end. And so he always found some reason to insert himself in our family's life. And my parents, like I said, were kind of, busy building their business. So it was a kind of a strenuous time for them. And so when it came down to like he started paying attention to my little sister who was younger than me and to me as well, there was like something that clicked in my head that I knew that it was, so like in my head, it was like when I was, 10, it was like, oh, this is my fault, and I think it was 9 or 10. I think it was 9 actually. And I was thinking it was my fault, but then I looked at my little sister who was 7 and I knew it wasn't her fault because how could it be her fault? So that's when she started telling me, because I started to notice his behavior towards her. And so I told my parents because I knew it wasn't my sister's fault because she was 7 and she was, I had that protective role on her, over her. And so my parents then went to the bishop and the bishop called him in, took away, I think his ability to do like something with priesthood. I don't know what it was, but he was still a high counselor. Like he was still in high council. Like I know that for sure because my dad was very upset about it. The bishop told my parents not to go to the police at all. My dad wanted to. The bishop told he would talk to the stake president, that he was going through repentance process, yada, 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 yada. So nothing was done outside the church. My parents were true believing Mormons, and so they listened to the bishop, since he holds the keys of the priesthood in that ward. So obviously he is directed by God to tell him not to go to the police. And so my parents did that. They didn't go to the police. But my dad was still so upset because this man still went to church as if nothing occurred. No one was warned. He couldn't talk about it. And so we moved actually out of the city that we lived in to a different ward, into just a completely different state to avoid this man. Then we get a phone call about a year and a half later that he had done it to another little girl in the ward. This time it was more severe than what he had done to me and my sister. And so we actually had to go to court for this. So the bishop at the time actually disregarded stake president and the 70s in the area, and he went to the police. He went to the police and called the police, and this is the fifth little girl at this point that we know of that's been on the record. And so he went to the police against all church leadership, against all advice, and he got in trouble for it. To this day, I don't think he's ever been called to any kind of higher calling beyond what he was at the bishop at that time. And so we went to my story is I got justice, so did my sister. So did all the other little girls that were there and spoke against this man. But we went to court, and I still remember thinking it was the most terrifying experience, having to point this man out in front of him, in front of the judge and everything at 11 years old. It's one of those things that it's kind of surreal. But yeah, we saw that firsthand. I saw that firsthand, the cover-up of how many children had to happen before, if that bishop hadn't gone to the police against the leadership's advice, it would have still been occurring. So I can't even imagine the damage he would have done more beyond that. So that's kind of like a summary of what had happened.
Yeah, and it's just terrible. Like, you think about these things, and I've been too intimately close to one of these situations, and you see just the wreckage that comes out of it, and I don't know, I just feel so sad. I think of a young girl being kind of put in that situation, and just how sad that is for her. I also think about the motive involved in not bringing it all to light. Like, what do you think the motive was, as you as you are kind of a victim of this system? What do you think the motive was of kind of keeping it within the church and not putting it out there?
As an adult, you look in hindsight, right? It's different. As a child, what really honestly came to me, I remember specifically one night where I just kind of closed that chapter for several years. Like, I was just like, that was done. It was done and said. Anne Frank was one of my most favorite books at the time, and I really drew strength from her example. So I actually wrote out this letter because she was inspired, to write a journal and stuff like that. So I think that there's so much example to glean from these people in the past, and so I got strength from that, because I really didn't get any therapy or counseling from anybody, or anyone ever kind of reached out to me. None of the church members did. It was just forgive him and move on. They told me, counsel me to forgive him and let it go, basically. And I can only imagine telling that to an 11-year-old now, to an abuser, oh, you need to forgive the abuser and move on. And that still kind of wow, people's mindset is just interesting when it comes to that. But in hindsight, I look at it like this is a very dangerous protecting pedophiles. I mean, it really is. It's protecting the pedophiles, and then using it in a guise to say the justice system is corrupt. Maybe the only way to do it is through the church leadership and through the correct priesthood. But obviously that it proves to be wrong because of how many examples are going on. And I think it also speaks to a more deeper disease in the church when it comes to A lot of shame involved. So I don't really know what's their motive other than
Yeah.
protecting pedophiles. That's really the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, and that's I wonder if it has to do with brand. I wonder if it has to do with protecting the brand of the church, right? And how squeaky clean it is, right? They have this
Yeah, and
idea,
then the
but
payment is to protect pedophiles. You're protecting those
yeah.
people. I mean, that's the payment of protecting the brand. And so, you know, yeah, it's like I know the last girl who was assaulted after me, she had several years of trauma that she went through. And so I'm grateful that nothing more serious happened to me, but like it happened to her. And I could see those direct effects. So whose price is it? Just for an image? I don't know. I guess if that makes sense, it doesn't make sense to me at all. It doesn't
Mm,
speak anything to Christ-like attributes to any organization. And so we should condemn it on every front. So
yeah, yeah, definitely. It's yeah, I just we could stay here and I could talk about I was involved in something similar where I was around a lot of victims of abuse. And it's just so like it is a deep problem that perpetuates itself and can have just so many downstream bad effects that to cover up for these people I think is like really disgusting. I'm just going to be
mhm.
honest. Like if somebody is abusing children, you should be the first person to call them in and have it have it be handled, to sweep it under the rug and to have people who are frankly unqualified to deal with these types of situations is crazy. And so I
Yeah, and
just
and another side to it is like, I don't like I said, I didn't talk about this part of my life for several years. And so the tendency with true believing Mormons that I've in my own family and my extended family is like, did that really happen? That's the reaction because they're so ingrained about even though it's verified, you can look up the court case, it could actually study the trial. It's like a study out there to show you how to approach these allegations and everything that happens. So it doesn't really matter what kind of evidence you put to people who are true believing Mormons. They want to excuse the behavior, excuse the leadership to some degree. And in that moment, they can just throw you under the bus. And so we have to be
mm,
as a Christian, I look at it and I'm like, they're not seeing it. They're just not seeing it because they're blinded by this follow the leaders, the church can do no wrong, that follow the prophet, the leadership is right. And so I understand that to some extent, but I also it's just one of those things, those tactics that they use.
yeah. Well, I'm sorry that happened to you,
Yeah,
Annalise.
I know.
That's
It's
Annalisa, that's terrible. I mean,
yeah,
that's you know, it, it's one of those things where I just I don't know. I just feel terrible for you to be in that situation as a young girl, and then on the back end of that to have people kind of doubt your experience, that's very verifiable.
mhm,
I would think that would be really really hard. And so you grew up in the church, and that was you were kind of holding to that. In your story, as we kind of talked a little bit off camera, um, you talked a little bit about your parent, about your dad, and
mhm.
his uh let's just say true believing Mormon self kind of took him down maybe a non-conventional LDS family setup. And so do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So my dad's always been very passionate, very zealous personality. He was I didn't know this until like recently. The very first goal that my mom and he told my mom after they got married in the temple was he wanted to get the second anointing. And if you don't know what that is, you could look that up, what the second anointing is. But so he was like gung ho about learning about that. Um,
How do you think he found out about it? Because
well,
that's a
he was very much into like study and deep doctrines, journal of discourses when he was younger. I mean, he was just one of those studious people in the Mormon church. It got him into some trouble because, as you can kind of see, the Mormon church has kind of like a anti-government United States government history. And so that's kind of what got him started. It was like he didn't want to pay taxes. He was trying to figure out some way, my dad's just very he's just all or nothing kind of personality. And so like it got him into this we moved to Utah in 2001 after 9/11 happened, because my dad was like, oh, the end of the world's coming. And by that time we had been.
Can I track on this? What age were you when you moved there in 2001?
Yeah, so I was 14. I had just turned 14, and I was homeschooled. And so I had lived in a predominantly Hispanic culture. So my maiden name was very much, very hard to say as an English person. So I actually had to change the way I said my last name, just because it was a complete culture shock when I moved to Southern Utah. I lived part of my life in Southern Utah, and I grew up around kind of like the rebel part of Utah, I guess you could say.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So then my dad, he got into a lot of like deep doctrines, specifically with polygamy, law of consecration and stuff like that. So he was looking for more truth, right, in his mind. And so I would say he was like in his late 30s or 40s at this point. And he was kind of getting into the Section 132 and why did it go away and all this other stuff. So him and my mom, over several years, my mom kind of kicking and dragging, because during this time, I had an older brother who passed away in a car accident. He was his name is Nephi, and so he actually passed away before he turned 20. The very next, like he was 19, he was going to turn 20 the next day in a car accident. So that kind of spiraled my dad even more into polygamy ideas and stuff like that. And so there was a lot of dynamics going on. So living in Southern Utah, kind of a rebel area of Mormonism in some ways, a lot of polygamy. The interest is there because you see them at stores, you see them just shopping, and they all have their pastel pink, dresses and stuff like that. And so out of all the kids, it was like my dad started going to the polygamous church, and he was kind of like that. And they believe in Mormons, thinking they were living the full law of eternal marriage. And so I don't think I met any other ex-Mormon or Mormon Mexican polygamists in my life except my father. And so that's kind of like what got him into that. And then he got, that kind of like dealt with a prepper kind of mentality. During that time period, I actually had moved out of the house. So I was already 18 after my brother had passed. And so I was kind of outside of that when he was doing all that stuff. And I sadly feel bad because I kind of left my younger siblings behind. I'm the second oldest. Dealing with a lot of very unique experiences in the Mormon church.
Yeah, and so you moved into this area, just so that I can kind of recap this, where there were a lot, like a polygamist group, and that you think might have influenced your dad, or maybe the doctrine plus that, or how did that all work out? Because to me, we have like the official Declaration 1, right? That is no more polygamy, kind of, and then mostly on the surface, right? And people who are obviously very familiar with the church, they know that polygamy, you can't do it anymore. And so how do you think your dad kind of reconciled that with belief? I mean, where did he find himself in the we'll call it the Brighamite branch of Mormonism?
It's funny you say sort of, kind of, right? Because that's the big caveat right there, right? It's if you truly read the 132, you would read the manifesto for what it was: appeasement to the, as a true believing Mormon. Like if you were to put the reality of like what Wolf of Woodruff did, anyone else did, they were kind of like, oh yeah, we don't do it, but we do it, but we're not going to tell you that we're doing it. And so, it's a very gray area to be in, especially when your foundation is ongoing revelation, which the church is based on. So, I mean, it's kind of like one of those things like there's like so many jokes when it comes to Catholicism, Protestantism, but definitely that.
Yeah, and okay, so our stories actually kind of weave here a little bit. After the official declaration one, the manifesto, I had family that were polygamists that moved down to Mexico.
Wow, that's
Which is
cool.
kind of funny, right? That
Yeah.
that we have this this kind of weave in story. But obviously they were fine practicing it, not in the United States, and still being part of, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Brighamite branch of Mormonism.
Yeah.
So I just think that that's always kind of interesting. As I heard your story about polygamy, I said, "Oh, I have, like my family back in what would it be, early 1900s
Yeah.
were polygamists down in Mexico." So I just think that that's a really interesting thing. So your dad decides that he's testing out this polygamist. You said it wasn't FLDS though, it was a different.
No, it was like, it's called Centennial Park. It's like the liberal version of the FLDS. They broke off from the Warren Jebs people, and so they're more like, how do I say? They're just more like chill. Like they're more chill to outsiders coming into their group. They're really nice people. I think they're honestly some of the still best people I've met. And really, they make awesome food. And like I really, like whenever they were gonna like do anything, because I'd go to their dances. I would, like my dad. I was still living there at the time, so they were kind of dipping their toes into it. And I was like, well, if there's gonna be food, I'll go, because they make some of the best country food in the world. And because every wife kind of has their own special dish. So like one's really good at making pies, and the other one's really good at cooking like chicken. Like it was like, well, I mean, I don't believe in any of this. It's super chill food, so I'm gonna go eat them, hang out with them, and they were really nice people. So I got to like get into that community a bit, and on this whole time, my bishop, the Mormon bishop, mainstream Mormon bishop, was trying to dissuade my parents from going that route. This is before my brother passed away. So when my brother passed away, it was kind of like a snowball effect. Like it just like escalated, and my dad was like, "We've got to follow this. It's the true way." Joseph Smith, he's a big Joseph Smith proponent. And so, yeah, so coming from that, and spoiler alert, my dad's now saved. He rejects Mormonism and believes in the Bible and the biblical Jesus. Can you understand, if you're coming from that point of view to where my dad's at today, it's a miracle from God. And to see that transformation is just amazing. So
Yeah, that's beautiful to think about. But I have a respect for people who are passionate about their beliefs, right?
yeah.
Like I know me in the Mormon church, for better or worse, I was so hardcore in, and I think that pushes you, even as we see in the ex-Mormon space, those people are also hardcore ex-Mormon, right? They have
Yeah.
very strong, passionate beliefs. These are not lukewarm people. And so that translates, right, to, well, I'm going to actively pursue this. And now it's beautiful that your dad, and I believe both your parents, right, are
My mom and my dad. Yeah, they accepted Christ. My mom accepted Christ a little bit after I was rebaptized. I got rebaptized in my local church up in Texas. And my mom kind of that kind of shook her up a bit about like, why is she changing beliefs all of a sudden? Because I was the more zealous one. I was like the one that was all in out of my 6 siblings. My brother had passed, so I was acting oldest, and so I was very much poster child for the family. Like, did they do what Anna wants? Go that route, get married in the temple, all that stuff. So going from my last calling was primary president. 2 wards in a row, to believing in the biblical Jesus was very shocking for my parents. And so it really made them question what this was.
Yeah. And I think it's that can have a real big effect on people, right? Like watching what's happening around you in your family. A lot of people have experienced that in the church, like since COVID, since all of these, kind of shake up in the church, not going to church. A lot of people started to kind of do things, differently, and families have kind of started to change in that. I want to back up a little bit in your story. So we have this early childhood, kind of late teenage years with your parents kind of in on the polygamy side. What happened like after high school? Did you go on a mission? Did you I guess that would be a very conventional path, I think, for younger people, but we're about the same age, on Annalisa,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So what is it that you did after high school, and what was kind of the next few steps for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, like my childhood, like that was stained with that abuse, but I also enjoyed the Mormon culture. I loved the Mormon community. I used to like, I mean, Pioneer Day was like one of my favorite days. I loved dressing up in bonnets and all that fun stuff. I kind of have an old soul, personality. So it was like one of my things I love to do. And so when I was like in my teen years and I grew up in Southern Utah, there was a little bit of like, I mean, even though I look kind of like wet, I'm Mexican, I have that darkness, like kind of maybe Italian looking to people. So there was a little bit of like a weird vibe when I moved to Southern Utah, especially in the early 2000s. There was like, I wouldn't say racism. I wouldn't say outright racism, but just kind of like a little bit of like I got comments like, your dad's a doctor and you're Mexican and you live in this house. Like it was just confusing to them because all the Mexicans they
Mm.
knew were like day workers or, weren't educated. And so it was a little bit of an interesting dynamic. And so my teen years was very interesting, kind of like not shade it with that, but a little bit like that, if that makes sense.
Interesting. Yeah. And so that was through your teens, and then you graduate high school, you kind of move through. What was that like? Like, did you go to a church college, or did you stay back home? What was kind of the next track for you?
So kind of leading into that, it was like I kind of went inactive towards my later teens, and then my high school, I didn't graduate because my brother passed away, so I was like, I'm not going back to school. I got my GED. I went to Dixie State College. At the time, it was called Dixie, and I didn't really do institute. I wasn't really active at that point because I was so, there's a lot of things going on with my brother passing, that dynamic that I felt from the Southern Utah vibe. And it was just a very interesting, because I didn't really get into like church again until I was almost, I was like in my when I just turned 20. So I moved back home because I wasn't like I was kind of in the party scene a little bit, to believe it or not. I was kind of like in the high school years, I was like, you guys always watch Disney movies and I want to go out and have fun with friends and like go to parties and stuff like that. So I was kind of like trying to find my spot. And so because of that, and I think of my personality, I was just kind of like party-ish for like the 3 years of my life, my later teens to that. So I wasn't like this proper Mormon girl for those years.
Okay.
Um,
All right.
but I definitely always said the church was true. I was one of those, I guess you could say, Jack Mormons. And so I knew I was going to get married in the temple. I had several objectives that I wanted to achieve, but I wasn't really living that lifestyle. And then I moved to Texas when I was 20. And my grandma, who's like this true believing Mormon to this day, she's like, if you live with me, you have to go to church. And I hadn't really been consistently to church for, I think at that point, almost 4 years. And
Mm.
so I was like, okay, well, I guess I have to go to church because it's like free rent. So I'm going to church. And she had like spies, she had spies on me. So she knew like if I didn't go to church, she would find out. And so I did go to church. And that very first Sunday, I actually went to the YSA ward, and I met my future husband.
Oh, wow. There you
Yeah.
go. Hey, that's totally tracking Mormon style, though. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is.
There you
It
go.
really is.
So you met your husband at the first YSA, it was at the first time you went to church at that ward.
Yeah, in that ward. And it was like it was a fireside. I showed up like almost an hour late. And my childhood friend that I had known since, I was a kid, she introduced me to the guy she liked, which I think was a bad move on her end because we kind of jived at that moment. And then, so yeah, we met, and, 6 months later we were married. So.
Wow, there you go. Going in, swooping in on your your
Yep.
friend's hot crush. There you go.
I know, to this day. My bad. Sorry, Jillian.
Yeah, there you go. Well, at least she gets a shout out on this podcast.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you
yeah,
got that. That's your consolation. Um,
yeah.
so you end up meeting your husband. And is he fully active, like full on the church, or
Yeah,
what
so
was?
my husband's story is very, he's pioneer stock on his mom's side. His dad was a convert, and they're very true believing Mormons to this day. Was actually home early from a mission, so he was actually he had just gone on his mission and he returned back in 2 weeks. So he was kind of like persona non grata in the YSA ward in a sense. Like back in 2008, it's like, well, you don't come home from your mission. Like that's just something you don't do, especially when you come from the mission field. If you come home early, you're kind of like this, like, what are you doing here? Go back on your mission, or we're not going to date you. That was the kind of vibe back in 2008.
Oh,
So
I know that all too well. I went to BYU, Idaho, and I remember just like trying to exist, like not even trying to date. I had my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, and I remember people just being like so dismissive, like, "Oh, you're a preemie." Like for those of you who aren't in the maybe the Mormon culture in that respect, but a pre-mission preemie, they're like, "Oh, you like can't hang out with us." I'm like, "It's a bunch of dudes." Like, why can't I hang out with you guys? It's very interesting. And maybe that culture has changed.
yeah,
Maybe we're kind of looking into the past and saying our experience, but there was a time where if you hadn't gone on a mission yet, or especially if you had come home early, there was a lot of shame and there
yeah.
was a lot of guilt associated with that. So you met him right when he came back,
Yeah.
as he's kind of wrestling with this stuff, huh?
Yeah, and we went on a date. I didn't know he had gone on a mission until because we were dancing salsa, and he was like, "Oh, I'm so hot," and he was like sweaty, and I was like, "Well, just take off your extra shirt," because I thought I'd seen the white shirt underneath, and I didn't know he had gotten his garments already because I didn't know his story, and he's like, "Oh, these are my garments." I'm like, "Oh," and I was confused about because I hadn't dated anyone who wasn't like who was his age that had gotten his garments and wasn't on a mission or
Oh, I
had not
see.
come back. So,
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, okay." So then, he came back on a mission. We went on our first date, and it was pretty much like I knew he was my guy after first 10 minutes. It was kind of annoying, to be honest, in my mind at 20 years old. I was like, "This is not fair. I'm not gonna have as much fun." Like I already found the person. It was kind of like I liked the dating game, so I was like kind of like bummed but happy that I found him. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Um,
yeah.
yeah, I have a snarky question. So why
Yeah.
is it that you like the dating game? Is it the free meals?
No, actually, I love banter. I do love banter. I
Oh, okay.
love banter. I think it's the funnest thing. I think it's awesome. I love awkward conversations and awkward moments. Like I'm this weird person that likes to go beyond that and finds a challenge in that. So even to this day, I have a fun time with all my friends and like we just like I'm just that personality. So and I love dating different types of people and getting to know them. Like the guys that I was dating, I was like, oh, this is interesting. That person, that was kind of like it was like next person. I don't know. It was weird. Most
Mm.
people don't like dating, but I kind of had fun with it.
Yeah, nice. Well,
Yeah.
that's that's fun. So you guys get married 6 months after meeting.
Yeah.
You do that. What does family life look like for you? Did you guys stay active in the church? Were there seasons of maybe not being in? Were you full on medium? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I was always like more zealous than my husband. Believe it or not, like after I was like done with my, wild teenage years, I was kind of like, this is my life, I'm going all the way in. This is like who I am. This is, took on the callings. And my husband was more of like reserved because of the way he had been treated after coming back from his mission. So it really struck him the way the church treated him after his mission. So he was never like one to lead Bible study or do FHE. Like I was always the one that was pushing for all that stuff. So both active though, both active. He was an elders quorum president at one point.
Mm.
And so at a pretty young age, and we were just going to school, just so busy. You know how those years are. You're just so busy. Like you're going to school, you're having babies, you're fulfilling your callings, you're paying your tithing. you're just like in this bubble of just go, go, go. I mean, you're always constantly trying to get better every moment. And so for us, we never really had moments where I never questioned the church, not once in my life. And I know that might sound super weird to people, because I had all these people who I trusted and loved, and these doctors, lawyers in my family who were like, this is a true church. And so, I never questioned the church. I always said, this is a true church. Never looked beyond that. I loved history. I was a nerd when I was a kid. I mean, I guess kind of nerdy now, but I read the Work in the Glory series, in 1 week. It was kind of one of those people that just got really into this history of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. So I thought I knew the history of the church. And so I could tell you right now, I was one of those people that would listen to podcasts and all these things about church history. And so I was very much in it. And my last 2 callings were primary president. So it was before that I'm just kind of giving you an idea, not to look what I was, but I was a stake young women's camp director for my stake at, I think, 27 years old. That was doing a lot of bigger callings, and my husband was moving that way too. And so we were very much in it. I mean, we named our children, our boys, after Book of Mormon prophets. That's how deep we were in Mormonism and how much we believed it was true.
Yeah. And I think that gives a really good perspective. I think a lot of times ex-Mormons are kind of painted with this, well, they were lazy, they got offended, all of those things, where you're like, no, there can be other reasons why people leave. And here you have a family where elders quorum president, primary president, I mean, these are very crucial people in a ward that help it function, and they're, as of right now, not in the Mormon church anymore. Yep. And I think it's really important. I said on another podcast, not on this one, where I was a guest, I said there's going to be a huge vacuum of leadership at some point. I mean, Annalisa, I look at you, I look at your husband, that is leadership that the church is not going to have in 20 years. And they need you and your husband to be the, Stake Relief Society president and in the stake presidency. They need those people. And so if those people are leaving, it just doesn't really work long term, because they need them, and they need them to not be paid, and they need them to, work a part-time job for free. They need those people. But yeah, I think that's a really important story. So where did it all, fully active family, where did it all start to kind of unravel, on as far as, and unravel may not be the right term, because I think it turns into something really beautiful, but where did it all start to go in a different direction?
Well, okay, so I gotta briefly talk about so as a true believing Mormon, we put all our eggs in this basket. We are sold the promise of covenant promises that we keep our covenants, we're going to be eternal family, all that stuff. And so I have 4 boys, and I had a 3rd boy who passed away at 3 months old. He was born and he had NICU issues and all these things, and so he went to be with Jesus, right? And so my eternal family was paramount to me. So to put into perspective, as a true believing Mormon, you have to look at it you're doing these things, you believe fully in this gospel, you believe fully in this covenant path, everything's there. And so you're going into that, and then all of a sudden COVID happens. COVID is probably the catalyst. A lot of people would say why is it always COVID? At the time I was pregnant with my 4th son, and he was a miracle baby. And I had just set up, and I'm just gonna it was just the best bulletin board in primary I think I've ever set up in my life. I had it laminated. I had it all done up. It was awesome. I was so excited. And then COVID happened. So no one saw it for a year almost. And so during that time period, we had to move because my husband's school had changed rotations. And so we had to make some drastic changes in the family. And then I was just, waiting for March, I think it was March 2020 when COVID was going on and everyone was waiting. Oh no, it's April. I'm sorry, April General Conference. And we were waiting to get some guidance from this. They had just actually announced the temple that I live down the street from in southern Texas. And so we were excited about that, but there was no guidance. It was a lot of fear in the air regarding COVID, and rightly so. It was like something that was unknown at the time. People didn't understand it. We didn't understand it. It was brand new, stay in the house, all these things. And so I was, following direction of my leaders, but I didn't get that reassurance, that reassurance from my leaders. I really felt fear from my leaders. And I thought to myself, that was like the first start. It's like, why are these older men who are in their 90s afraid of passing on? Like, it didn't, like, I don't think anyone's rushing to get on a motorcycle and driving 80 miles an hour. I don't think people typically do like life-threatening things, but this is a virus that you can't outrun. You can't outrun it. It's going to get you at some point. It's just nature. It's like the flu. You're going to get it at one point in your life. And so I was like, okay, so why are these people, who are these men, not giving a reassurance, but giving fear, like not telling us, like, we know where we're going. Like, it was like, we hope we know where we're going. That's always the case with Mormons. Like, you ask a Mormon or an LDS person, I say Mormon because I grew up Mormon, where are you going when you die? And the response is, well, I hope I go to heaven. I hope I'm with Jesus. I hope I go to the celestial kingdom. And so there's never surety, there's never confidence in the answer. And so I realized, like, why aren't we having confidence? So that was the beginning. And then it was the little jab that you get. And so
okay.
I was like, I was very much at that point, like, very hungry for to know what would happen. And so at that point, I was 2021. My aunt, who's actually in like my dad's age, she and I were on the phone, and she was a true believing, like, she was this woman that would take her newborn baby to teach seminary at 5 a.m. Like, she was one of those true believing Mormons. And that was her 7th baby, guys. Like, one of those people that would do anything for the church, didn't question it. And when that came about with the prophet said everyone should do it, and if you didn't do it, you were like a second-class citizen in a way. Like, why aren't you trusting the prophet? Why don't you get it? And so I was getting to the point where I was feeling that like I would be in a group of women at church, and they would like, oh yeah, I got mine. And I was like, oh, and they looked at me. I was like, oh, I didn't get it. And like, women would literally put their mask back on around me after that comment, after they got it. So it was like this weird, that was the first moment where, if you can imagine like a group of people running and like in synchronizing steps to a goal, and then all of a sudden you like see at the end of the goal is like there's a cliff, and you're like, hold on guys, there's a cliff, and everyone else just keep on running past you, but there's only a few people that are like questioning what's going on right now. That's how I felt when it came to that. I was like, why can't I just question, and why can't I just say no? And so it was this cult mentality, and I want to say that not as like a liberal term, but it's very much groupthink. Okay, if you want to put a word to it, groupthink mentality that made me question, why am I getting shunned for not doing this? If I have personal revelation, right? What I thought at the time was like, my personal revelation says not to do this. And so it was very shocking to me. So that was the beginning of like unraveling, but it wasn't like I was feeling betrayed by my church, because I was I not betrayed in a way like they pushed me out of things, but I couldn't go I was actually passing the Salt Lake Temple Square. And from what I understood, I couldn't go into some of the buildings unless I showed my COVID card that I had COVID vaccines. And that was for a time period that had been happening. So I was like, I feel like this is just really out of hand. So that was the beginning of it all. That was the start, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I know that that's a big thing for people. I was very active in the church, at this time as well, pre-COVID. And during COVID, I was very active in blessing the sacrament and doing all those things in my home. And I remember one week, a lot of people that I'm friends with, this is not a political show, okay? I am as centrist as you can be. And my wife actually gave me a hard time yesterday. She's like, you are way more liberal on a lot of subjects than I am. And I said, well, that's probably true. So this is not a political show. But I remember talking with, I'm in the Mormon church. There are a lot of conservatives. And I remember how people spoke to the jab. We're going to call it the jab.
Yeah.
Before before the church told them to do it. And they were all like, that's stupid. The government can't control what I do, all this stuff. And then on a dime, the prophet endorses it. And these same people were the first people in line the next week to get the jab. And so I just think it's really important to maybe, bring that to light. I don't know if that's your same, Annalisa, I don't know if that's your same experience, but that was what I experienced.
For sure. Like I got calls from my uncles and who are in the medical field, and they were like, the prophet says to do it, it's tested. And I was like, well, I got so frustrated, Kai. I was like, literally, like I said, and I even told my bishop this, because I was getting so much pressure from everyone to get it because the prophet said it was safe, that I was just like, literally, if you put a line of cocaine in front of me and the jab, like, I'm going to do the line of cocaine because I know what that does. But like, honestly, I had never done it before, but scientifically, like, it's not going to cause me harm because it's been proven over time. Like whatever.
This is an endorsement for cocaine here.
Yeah. It was like, and then, so that shut him up because it was so extreme in the way I was explaining it, because I was getting so much barrage of like people trying to get me to get it. But I was like, listen, if I take that line, then I'm getting skinny and I'm going to clean my house very well for like a couple hours. So like, it's going to be awesome. And so I was like, this one, I just don't know. I don't know. And I don't feel comfortable with. And so like, that was my thinking, but that kind of like was the point where I was like, enough is enough. Stop bothering me with this. I'm not going to do it. Like, that's it. And so that wasn't even it. That actually wasn't it that broke my shelf. That was the beginning of just like stopping the group think, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and there's a big break there. If you are a true believing Mormon, if you were fully active before COVID, there's just this break. And you talked about earlier on in this, just the busyness of being, a young a parent with children, trying to do your callings, trying to, care for house or work, all of these things. And I think the church likes for you to be so busy that you can't step back and say, wait, what? Like, what happened? Yeah. They want you to be anxiously engaged in a good cause, right? And so there you go. There's a little Mormonism for you guys. And so you don't get this break. And like, COVID was a break. It was like, here you go. You now don't have to go to church every Sunday, and you're probably not going to be able to do it. And you have this time to kind of think, and the church really doesn't want that. I don't think that the results were very good when people can really be within themselves, have time to catch their breath. I think you see a lot of millennials, and I shouldn't even just say millennials. You see a lot of people just start to question when they aren't so busy doing, their job for the church or their calling. So the job was one of those items that you didn't like within it. And then what else was there? I mean, within the context of COVID that maybe made you start to question. And I think it's fun. Can I throw this out there?
Yeah, for sure.
Our timelines are exactly the same.
I think so too. Actually, when I was listening to your stories before, I was like, oh, we're like the same age, I think. Yeah.
Well, we're the same age, but our timelines in COVID.
Yeah, for sure.
As when we started to maybe change our thinking and change our mindset around the church. And we were both very hardcore in the church. So, just continue on in the story. Sorry, I like to banter. So go ahead and
It's good. And so that was one of my bigger things. And then I was just being like, I had a baby. He was born early. My last baby was born early as well. So he was a 31 weeker. And so I had a lot of focus on him in that time period. So it was a blessing that I got to focus on my baby, which was needing me the most at that time, and getting him fat and chubby like all babies should be. And so what I did was basically we moved, and then we started to go to church online, whatever ward we were in. But mainly it was actually like, when it came down to it, it was dinosaurs that opened me up to Christianity, to be completely honest. And you're going to link me with, why did dinosaurs do that? So like, I was teaching my children, homeschooling at the time. We were living in my RV full time because my husband was rotating. And so one day I was just like going, I was actually a newly called primary president in my new ward, because we had gone back to church. It was like 2021, end of 2021. And so I get calling to be a primary president. I'm doing all these things, but I'm still like this. I've always, like, in my last primary presidencies, like, it was like I was kind of a weirdo, because I was like, you know what? I saw kind of the writing on the wall with a lot of kids that are in the church. They just left the church. They just went agnostic or atheist, or some of them, like the statistics in my family, out of like the 30-something grandkids, it was like 2 or 3 were active in the church and as adults.
Wow.
So it was very like a low statistic on that. So I was like, you know what? Like, I kind of want to just focus on Jesus. So that was like, I think a tender mercy that God just kind of like started to move in my heart to just focus on Jesus Christ. So I was like the weird primary president, like, okay, yeah, like, see, articles say, yeah, it's there, but like, let's focus on Jesus. And so when I guess, because YouTube listens to you, and Big Brother listens, it started to pull up things on YouTube about Jesus from Christian pastors. And so one of them was about dinosaurs. And I was like, oh, I guess it's not harmful, because typically as a True Blood Mormon, you're not supposed to go outside the prescribed LDS library to look for any kind of spiritual insight. You're supposed to use the LDS library or gospel talks and like conference talks. And so I was like listening to this one thing called Answers in Genesis about dinosaurs. And for some reason, he started talking about COVID, because it was like in that time period. And exactly what I needed to hear about Jesus and my security in heaven with God was from this Christian pastor that I hadn't heard from any of my leaders for the last 2 years. And so I was like, why does this make me feel better listening to this Christian pastor? Yeah, he was talking about dinosaurs earlier in the Bible and Genesis and everything, but like, I know he's giving these scriptures in the Bible where I can know I'm saved. I can be with Jesus. Like, this is amazing. And so there was that interesting dynamic right there. And then I moved back to Texas because I just couldn't handle living in where I was living with my husband. We were like, well, let's move back home. And so we moved back home. And I remember, like, I still remember the moment where like my entire shelf fell apart. It was me cleaning the bathroom. I was cleaning the bathroom to my house, and I was listening to the Gospel Topics essays because someone had mentioned it. I didn't go to anti-Mormon stuff, guys. I literally just like, someone's like, you would like history, you would like the Gospel Topics essays. And I think it was like one of the sisters from church or something, because she was like a seminary teacher. I forget who. I don't know. And then, so I was like, okay. And I heard about it, and then I clicked on it. And then I like clicked on Joseph Smith, and I think it was like the trial of something. I like read on something else, and I was listening to something about a trial of 1823. And I was like, what? I never heard of that. And I just like to click on things like footnotes and go on that way. And so when I read, and I was listening to it as I'm cleaning, I listened to this part where Joseph Smith tells this lawyer or this judge that he's glad he caught him because he had been taking money from Josiah Stoll for 2 years at the time. And Josiah Stoll's nephew was like, this guy is stealing money from my uncle, who's going to give me the money at the end of it all when he passes on. So I want you to stop paying Joseph Smith for looking for treasure. And so Joseph Smith's argument to that was his eyes were tired, and he was so grateful that the judge stopped him. And so this is Joseph Smith at 17 years old. And so I have boys. I grew up with plenty of cousins at 17-year-old. I remember boys being 17 years old. And if I was their mother, and if I was Joseph Smith's mother, I would go in with my chancla and hit him over the head and say, you little liar, stop taking money from people. Like, go get some work. Like, good for nothing. Go work. Like a real job. And so in that moment, like, the character of Joseph Smith just completely fell apart. And then I was like, what? This can't be true. I've never heard this. And I kept on listening to all the Gospel Topics essays. And I didn't, honestly, to be truthful, I didn't listen to all of them completely. I just was like, once you know it's false, it's kind of like, for me, it's like pointless to rehash it over and over again. But this is the biggest part, is like, I remember like my whole world, like once Joseph Smith falls apart, everything else falls apart. I mean, he's not Jesus Christ isn't the cornerstone of Mormonism, it's Joseph Smith. because once
Sure.
you really look at the whole doctrine behind Mormonism, it's all Joseph Smith. If it didn't have him, it wouldn't be there. And so when that fell apart, I had to call my husband, right? And so that conversation was very scary because my husband's not home with me at that time. He's out in a different state. And I don't know what to tell him. Like, I just don't know what to say to him other than I call him, I say, hey, this religion's not true. Joseph Smith's a liar. And I just don't believe it anymore. And he was like, what? Like can you imagine his reaction? His wife, who was true believing Mormon, most zealous than anyone else he knew. And it wasn't true. It just came down like a ton of bricks. I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are listening to this and going through a faith crisis, I don't know if you have to explain it. I think that they know in their minds what that moment is like, where they, at least for me, I can listen to your story and be like, I know exactly where I was when I figured out it was all fake and it was all made up. And it's, for people who haven't experienced that, it is one of the most terrifying things, because you base your whole life around this religion, the character of Joseph Smith, the character of Brigham Young, these leaders that we put on a pedestal our whole lives and looked up to, praise to the man, right? These guys. And when you find out that it's not what you thought it was, it is absolutely devastating. It just is. And I mean, here you're telling your story, and you've had some really hard things that you've dealt with: the passing of a child, your childhood and abuse within that, all of these things, losing of your brother, right? All these things, and a faith crisis on top of that. These are all really hard things to deal with, in that. So where did it take you, though? Where, after you had kind of found out it wasn't true, we know the direction of a lot of people that come to find out the church isn't true, and that is a path of non-belief, and atheism, agnosticism. Where is it that it took you after you kind of came to that resolution?
Yeah. So my husband, when I called him, he told me something that I think that came from God, because my husband wasn't the type to bring up religion or Jesus or God in the way he did. He said, well, just hold on to Jesus. Just hold on. It's like, do you want to believe in Jesus? And so my back history is like, I love ancient Near Eastern studies, and that was my focus. I was actually going to go to BYU for that. But I decided not to do it at the time. And so basically my focus was on the historicity of the Bible. And I knew it to be a historical book. And I told my husband I wanted to believe in Jesus. I just didn't know who he was to me in that moment. Because once it falls apart, it is the most terrifying thing. But it isn't, because like I've had some very terrifying moments, like my son, with doctors and, a lot of things that I think at my age was very, like, grief was not foreign to me, if that makes sense. It was it was like another grief, but a different type, and almost to the same level of losing a loved one, almost to that same level. So yeah, like, I think that I was very much like, didn't know what I wasn't Mormon anymore. I went back one Sunday, I think another Sunday for a blessing. And every time I went like the next Sunday I went over, I wanted to scream off the top of my lungs, like, this isn't true, guys. This isn't true. This is not a true church. But I couldn't. I was just sitting there and I was so uncomfortable. And I think there was only one sister that went up to me and just said to me, like, Anna, are you okay? And my face was just like, I guess, telling a different story. But I was like, yeah, I'm fine. But I just like wanted to scream and yell at her, like, this isn't true. Like, this is not true. And so I didn't do it, obviously, at the time. And so to this day, I think two people out of my people that I've known all my life has really come up and asked me why, because the answer is more scarier than anything else, I think, to them. But I was leaving that, and then the very next week, my husband's like, by the way, there's this thing called Trail Life that you know we want our boys to get into. It's Christian based, Boy Scouts. I don't know if you know Trail Life, but it's like kind of similar to Boy Scouts.
Yeah, my son was in it for a little bit.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's a great program. I mean, we're still involved with it from being far away. And so we actually had my husband gave me this card, or actually it came from my aunt who gave it to my husband, who then told me about it. I call this number and this guy named Mark answers the phone and he's like, well, what church do you go to? Because it's a Christian base. We kind of need to know what church you go to if you're a Christian base. I'm like, well, this is the first time I'm saying this out loud to anyone besides my husband. I was like, I was Mormon like a week ago, but I'm not. I guess I'm Christian. Like, and he's like, what? Like, he's just like, I think his mouth dropped on the other end phone. Like, you know, like he didn't know what to say. He's like, well, let's meet for coffee. And I was like, okay. Like usually I'm so like, I got to tell you guys, like I would sneak coffee every once in a while. Like as a Mormon, I guess you could say I was like one of those deep-seated with those Mormons. Like sometimes I just wanted coffee and I just like looked so good on the menu, so I would get it and I'd feel so bad and guilt trip over it forever. Like I'm not fulfilling my covenants and I'm doing this horrible thing. But so when he's like, well, let's go get coffee, and I was like, okay, like let's go get coffee. And so he sits down and he's like explaining to us the gospel in that same week. So God is so gracious and good that he took me from Mormonism, and people will say like, oh, well, you went directly into another cult. But that's just ignorance. If you really looked at the Bible and read the Bible and just looked into who Jesus was, it's just like, I know a lot of people might come around and say like, oh, you just went from one cult to another cult. And that's just, I can't tell you. I think maybe God just looked at me and said, Anna, you went through so much hardship in your life, you know, I'm going to put you with me. Like, it was like, and I get emotional thinking about it because he didn't have to, but he did. And yeah, it was in that moment where he kind of moved me into a community. And I remember going to a church service on April the 6th. And I remember getting there. I mean, I'm raised kind of like Southern Texas. So I was like, even if I wasn't happy, I'd smile. And so I get to this church, and one of my first interactions was a assistant pastor, and he's like, welcome. And I was like, hi. And I just couldn't really get engaged with him because I was like, I was so mad. I was so mad that this is not my church. This is not my people. Why am I here? You know?
Sure.
And it was mad. I was like mad for a good couple of months. And then I think it was me just reading the Bible. And then really was reading the Bible, like trying to get to know Jesus as a historical, who he was, right? By his words. And so when I tell you, when I read the Bible again after leaving Mormonism, I don't think I was saved just yet, because I was reading the Bible and I read it and it was like a new book. It was a new book to me. Like, I was things in there I had never read before. I was like, this is not the same. And so we would talk to pastors, and we would talk to other people, and we were just like, you know, they were like, you guys are like the Bereans, because they'd laugh at, like, when pastors really got to know us, they're like, you guys are like the Bereans. You always want to ask, are you sure? Show me, where does it say in the Bible? Because we know the Bible. Like, I knew the Bible to be historically accurate. It has so much historicity behind it from secular and non-secular people. And so like, I could trust it to like show me where you're saying. So I need to verify what you're saying. So that's what they would nickname us, the Bereans couple, for a couple months. And so that's kind of like my start. And then I remember the moment when I accepted Jesus Christ as God. And I was like, the weight had lifted, and I was saved within, I would say, from leaving the Mormonism within 6 months, 8 months. It was like March, and then September I was saved. And then I got baptized and came out of the closet in December of 2022.
There you go. Yeah.
And so
ex-Mormon style, right? Coming out of the closet. Ex-Mormon. Yeah, there you go.
It was one of those things. My sister posted on Facebook, and I got one phone call, and from a sister that I respected, and from the church, a Mormon church. And she's like, well, why? And I was like, I'm just wanting to follow Jesus. Like, she's like, I thought we were doing that already. And I was like, no, I wasn't. And so
there you go.
It was hard, but it was definitely something that, so it's been almost like, it's been going on 2.5 years that I've been saved, and I praise God every day. It's like winning the lottery doesn't even come close to what it feels like.
Yeah, and it's you in your story you were talking about reading the Bible and it being different, like totally different. When you take off that Mormon lens of like reading it through what the prophet tells you it's supposed to say or what Mormon doctrine is. When you take off that filter and you just read it just straight up, I'm going to read this thing. I'm going to figure out what it's about. It's a totally different book.
Yeah.
And you start to see the contradictions. You start to see how it really does not line up with Mormonism. It just
Hmm.
it might be a tool that the church will cherry pick things from, but it is not in totality is not what the Bible is actually saying. It is what
Yeah.
supports and can be a good argument to support church teachings. And so, yeah, I experienced that too when I read it after coming out of the Mormon church. I said, "What? This? It says this?" Like I remember it talked about what a good leader was in the Bible, and it says, "And they had one wife."
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's interesting. And then
Yeah.
you see all of these things, or even I guess we'll stay on this marriage strain. Like you have to get married and have this eternal family, and Paul's like, no, you don't. You don't have to get
Yeah.
married.
It
You
completely
can,
changes the dynamic of what we're taught about marriage and family, and if it's called to you to be married, and then it is. It's so I think that it it makes the world has become simpler in so many ways because God has made it so clear in His Word what He wants us to do, and so yeah, that one I think my aunt has a harder time with about eternal marriage. That it's like stripped away when it compares to Christianity, that we're married in this life. And then obviously we don't need marriage the way we see it as Christians with Jesus. Um, and so I think people are also like, um, like you've given up your eternal family. I was like, well, I never gave up an eternal family. God would, I joined this huge eternal family, but also the eternal family that I had was limited and it was all on me and not on Jesus. And so there's so much to be said with that. But coming from my perspective of like losing a child, people had said you lost your son, and so there's things that are heavy when it comes to Mormonism
mm,
that you could take a one play. Like I guess you could say if I had been a faulty Mormon and my son had passed, it was because of my fault,
sure.
but because I was a good Mormon and my son passed, it was a blessing. He was a celestial soul. But the fact of the matter is, Jesus gave me my son, and I got to have him this time period. I'll have him afterwards, and none of that has to do with me. It's just we live in this fallen world, and that's just how it works out sometimes. That we're not perfect beings, and that it's just this different viewpoint. But definitely, I feel empathy for them who struggle with that when they like think that they're lost their marriage. But I'm like, no, Jesus is our bridegroom for one. Like we're his bride,
Yeah.
but we are completely in this big eternal family that's gotten so much more bigger than I can imagine.
Yeah. And the church writes checks they can't cash,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the big thing. I could write Annalisa a check for $1 million right now, give it to her. I mean, does that mean that there's $1 million if she puts it in her bank account? No.
No.
And what's interesting for those of you who have ever written a bad check before, that bad check can also actually be a detriment to you. If
Yeah.
you put that bad check in your bank account and it flops back, there are penalties for that. And I think that, a lot of times in the church, people say, you're losing this, you're losing that. Well, because I've cut ties with, all of these man-made ideas, whether that's eternal marriage, whether that's the Book of Mormon, whether that's follow the prophet, whatever, you cut ties with those things, that is a blessing. That is a bad check that you are not putting in your bank account. And you are
That's the way
able
we
to
put
be
it.
free in Christ. You're able to be free. Even if you're an ex-Mormon atheist, you're able to be a little bit more free because you are not in a system that is bad,
Yeah.
right? I believe that Jesus is what the Mormon church needs more of. It's what any non-believer needs. And because there is so much healing, like I look at both of our stories. I love that you said that that you see it as like a tender mercy of God that you were able to find Jesus so fast after leaving the church, that you look at your life and a lot of the hardship that comes from it, and you just feel like I just think that's beautiful. Like, but I believe in a God that is still reaching people, like, and it doesn't matter if you've been an atheist for 30 years. That does not matter. Like, God is literally steps away. He is so close for that freedom that you can find in Jesus. Like, he is just so close. And there's so much healing that comes from that. So I just think that's beautiful that you were able to find it. So let's look at the aftermath of all of this. So you say, hey, I'm putting it all at the feet of Jesus here. And what did that look like for your family dynamic? Because you're married, you have 4 kids, you have this large extended family. What did that look like?
Well, my husband was very much like, he accepted Christ, I think a month and a half after I did, and he had his own journey. I never pushed it on him, and he was just kind of on his own way. He always leaned more towards Christianity out of the 2 of us, actually. He was the one that was more like, on the edge. And so my sons, I had a 10-year-old at the time and an 8-year-old, and 10-year-old, 7-year-old, and a 3-year-old. And so my oldest started to notice we're going to a different church, and he's like, "Hey, mom," like, and his name is Nephi. Okay, so let me put his perspective. And so,
Yeah, there
I
you
was like,
go. Hardcore
yeah,
Mormon. And was he baptized?
yes, he was. He was
Okay, yeah.
baptized. Yeah, yeah. And so he remembers all of that. And so I was like, he's like, "Why are we going to this different church? Like, what's going on? Are we going to go to our church again?" And I was like, "Baby," like I just said to him, like, "Listen, we're gonna go. I'm not Mormon anymore." He's like, "Well, why not, mom?" And I was like, "Well, Joseph Smith lied." And he's like, "What?"
There you go.
And he's
Preach it.
like, "Yeah, I'm sorry, puppy. I'm sorry to tell you this. Like, he lied." And he's like, "Well, why did he do that?" He's very analytical, my son, very straightforward. And he's like, I'm like, "Well, he wanted, power, money, women, kind of all the same things that most men lie for." and, he's like, he's like, "Oh, well, that's not cool. Like, that's not cool." I'm like, "Guys, it's not. I'm sorry." Like, he's like, "Oh, well, what's for lunch?" Like, "I'm hungry." Like, and so that was kind of like his mentality. And then my middle son, which honestly I was a little surprised, his name is Ammon. And my middle son comes up, he says to me, he's like, "Mom," like he gets emotional. He's like, "Mom, like you're not Mormon anymore." I'm like, "No." And he's like, and I'm like, "Why are you crying?" He's like, "Well, I don't want to be anything you're not." And so I was like, "Listen, babe, like you can be Mormon if you want." Like I was like, at that time, I was like, just don't belong to the Church of Satan. Like if you belong to the Church of Satan, like I have a problem with that. Okay.
Okay.
And so he's like, "Okay." And then later on that night, he comes to my room and he starts to cry. He starts to cry to me. My middle son's more sensitive. He says, "Mom, so like, am I going to go to heaven then?" And I was like, "Yeah, baby. Do you believe in Jesus?" And I explained who Jesus was. He's like, "Yeah, Mom, I believe in Jesus." And so he's like, "So I don't have to do everything. Like, I don't have to do something. Like, I don't have to be so good and like not make a mistake." Like, and so he was already feeling religious scrupulosity, right? He was already feeling the pressure of doing all these things, that he was going to get baptized the next year. He was going to have to be like, and I was like, "Listen, God wants you to do those things. You're going to mess up. Everyone's going to mess up, but you're going to be with him in heaven for sure." So he felt like he got emotional. He actually started sobbing. And so I realized in that moment, my son, who was like 7, was starting to feel the pressure of this priesthood pressure. And he hated the talk of future missions. He did not like the idea of it. He was like, "Mom, I don't want to go. I don't want to do it." Like he was already at 7 years old, just not wanting. He was already kicking against it. And so that to me was like a big thing. And my husband and me, we walked into it. Like we got baptized. My oldest son recently got baptized almost a couple of months ago on his choice. And I think the scripture he quoted was, "He would not be ashamed of the gospel." of Jesus. So I was just so proud that he made that decision on his own, because we, as Christians, we don't push it on our children. We explain to them the Bible, and they have come to Christ, obviously. And so it's been a lot of good things on immediate family. Now, on my extended family, my mom got saved. My sister got saved. My other sister got saved. Her husband got saved. My dad got saved. And this all happened in the last year and a half. And now on my extended side of my family, I had a lot of mixed bag reactions, from anger to dismissiveness to laughing to just, because you're coming from a Hispanic point of view as well. Like it doesn't matter if you're 60 years old. If you're younger than, they're going to treat you like you're 12. It's this Hispanic kind of vibe. And so that's kind of the reaction I got, was like, you silly girl, you're just like your dad. You're going off on some crazy tangent. I'm like, it's just Jesus, guys. Like, look at Jesus. Like, look at him. Like, I'm not talking about extra wives, extra anything. Like, just look at Jesus. And that's too crazy for them. And so that's been something very unique, and I would say trying time to navigate with extended family. I had some very interesting experiences of that, but yeah,
that can be really, really tough. But you have seen really awesome results as, like, what I would consider to be revival within your family of people. And sorry, in the ex-Mormon world, revival means like huge change that's just happening like overnight. I am a very pro revival person, which means I love it when, I'm trying to think of even how to explain this, when you just know that the Spirit of God is moving. And I'll be somewhat crazy charismatic here. I have been in church services where you would think that, like, God is literally in the room. People are moving, and they would call it, just like it could only be God. They would say it's maybe a sovereign move of God. And you talk about, in a year and a half, so much of your family being in this new relationship with Jesus. And I think about revival. Like, I think about this, like, it can only be God at some point, right? It's wild to me to think that you have had such a, or that the Spirit of the Lord has had such an impact, on your family. What do you think that is? I think for a lot of maybe ex-Mormons who are Christians, they're hopeful, and they're I am with you on this, Annalisa. I'm hopeful that there are people out there in my family, friends of mine, whatever, that are going to know the same Jesus that I know. What, speak to that a little bit of, I mean, what is the secret? What is the what can
I
you
think
tell us about it?
I mean, I'm the type, like I said, I love awkward moments in conversations. I think that the best way to grow in the personality and in interpersonal relationships is to talk about the difficult things, but in a way that we don't disrespect each other, and that we love each other at the end of it all. Like, if Peter says, contend for the faith, but have patience and loving and kindness, and be tenderhearted to each other. And so, like, I think about my family, my dad specifically, like, for example, he went from that extreme to being saved in Jesus alone, and believing that the word is true and faithful. I mean, that's a huge thing. That's only God can do that. But when I can specifically remember this moment where my dad was like, no, Jesus is this, and we are gods in utero, and da 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 da. And he was spouting all the things that Mormonism say. And I was like, Dad, if you do not let go of that, you're going to go to hell. Like, and he just, like, when I said that, I didn't want to say it to my dad, but like the way I said it was just like, it looked like I hit him physically, because he took like a step back from me, because I didn't want to like condemn him, but what he was believing was going to condemn him by Jesus and God's standard and the biblical standard. And so, and he that took him like a year after that conversation. We didn't talk about it. And then the next time I talked to him about it, he's crying to me about how he accepted Jesus for the Bible and that he is God, because he was reading the Bible the entire time. And so having those conversations where like, yes, it's strenuous, like it's just like so uncomfortable, like you're gonna lose, like what Jesus says in Matthew, right? You're gonna lose like mother against father, like daughter against mother. Like there's gonna be times where it's so painful, like it's just so painful. But you have to say like, listen, I cannot agree with you in this statement. I cannot say this is true. This just happened. Like I had an interesting conversation. I had this I was getting my pedicure done, and I don't know why it's in salon, but I was getting my pedicure done. This woman starts talking to me about Jesus. Like, well, we started talking for 30 minutes, and then somehow it came out Christianity. And then I had this awkward moment where this woman's massaging my feet, and she's like, because she came from a Catholic background, and she's like, I just don't know. And I was like, well, I have a question, and I know the question is the most awkward question in the world, but I was like, do you know where you're going when you die? Like, do you know where you're going? And she's like, I don't know. Probably go to hell because I'm a bad person. I just know Jesus doesn't love me. Like, and so I was like, no, we can go through the word. And like, so off the top of my head, we start talking about scriptures. I was like, do you know who Jesus is? And we went over to Jesus, and she accepted Jesus Christ. As she's finishing my pedicure, and she's crying, and she's just like, and so like, there's moments where these awkward things have to happen where you have to kind of go past that and just say, Jesus, I trust you. And sometimes people will not accept it, and you just move on. We're just messengers. So we're literally taking the message and just moving it along. And we're just doing that because that's what Jesus calls us to do. And so like, that's one instance. And then, I'll have people try to have you agree to a falsity that, like my salon guy who was coloring my hair the other day was like, no, Anna, we are gods because God made us. And I was like, no, we're not gods. Like, and he's cutting my hair, guys. This is like serious damage could happen to me afflicted in my hair, on my body right now. And so like, I said to him, like, I'm sorry, but no, we are not gods. And there's only one God. And so he's like, oh, and he just kind of like cut quiet and just like, he's like, well, I don't know. I don't really read the Bible. I was like, well, I would encourage you, I said, to start with John so you understand who God is. And so that's when you have those, like, you have to kind of get past that, if that makes sense. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I just think and it can be really hard, and maybe we'll temper this a little bit where you have to know maybe. I think that with each hard conversation, you have to know where you are at in your spiritual walk. Like, yeah. I believe a lot of talking to people is about capacity. And sometimes you really have that capacity to evangelize, or you really have that capacity to even have a conversation with someone. Mm-hmm. And so I will say, like, what I love, Annalisa, about you is that you are on fire for the Lord. And I think that's really contagious. I think people probably who come in contact with you can experience that. I'm sure there's been ebbs and flows in that. There definitely, I can speak for myself. Maybe I shouldn't speak for you. I like to be very, evangelical, and what that means for those of you out there is I just like to spread my faith. Think of it, if you're from a Mormon perspective, every Christian a missionary. How about that one?
There you go. That's perfect.
So that's all it means, is I'm very missionary oriented. Okay.
Yeah.
But I think it has to do with capacity. There was a time early in my walk where talking about religion made me very angry. We're talking about even my wife and kids going to a Christian church before I was saved made me very angry. All of those things. And so it's really about capacity. And so I want to throw that little caveat out there.
For sure.
if you have that capacity to kind of have that banter, have that back and forth, or maybe you don't, and you're just acting in faith and you're saying, God, just show me where I have to go with this. I think it's really important to recognize that within yourself and do that. Annalisa, you are great. What, Annalisa? Oh my gosh, you guys! If
great.
You're counting at home, I'm trying so hard.
You said it right, Annalisa. Yeah, you said it right.
Okay, I'm just
in
not
Spanish,
that smart.
It's actually it's like if you put it together, Annalisa means analyze. Annalisa.
Really?
Yeah.
Annalisa. Yeah. Okay. So our names both have some fun thing. I am Malachi, which means.
Oh, okay, cool.
which means message from the Lord, which is really funny
Yeah,
and
that's
odd that
awesome.
I have a podcast. Which, hey, there you go.
Yeah.
So I like to give people just a moment where you can address kind of the ex-Mormon community, the ex-Mormon Christian community, and just give like your final point. Like I like to give the floor to people for them to say whatever is on their mind and whatever they think would be impactful. And so I just wanted to give you the last part of this as we kind of finish up this interview. And come on, Annalisa is awesome.
Oh,
I know
thanks.
that I would love to have her back on in some capacity because
Oh, appreciate it.
she is great. So what do you have? What would you say to people? Like what would be something that a message of hope for that ex-Mormon group?
Yeah, I definitely think so I wrote it down just because like I was like thinking about like what I could kind of share with y'all. Um and usually I just talk off the cuff, but usually I like to like kind of really focus on this because I think this is the biggest jump right here. So just going to start off right here. It says, I know it may seem crazy or scary or even silly to ask this question, but what if the reality of Jesus Christ, the Messiah, the one true God, was not the same Jesus we were taught? If you choose to dismiss that possibility, that is your decision. However, I encourage you to start reading by the Gospel of John, written by the beloved disciple. Discover what he says about Jesus, then continue reading. Where can we find Jesus? We look at the Bible, this time-tested, historically verified document at its most basic secular level. This book spans over 1,600 years, 3 continents, 3 different languages, generations of prophecy, all pointing to the fullness that Jesus brings. It is simple yet profound truth is, without Jesus, none of it's possible. Even if you're not ready, it doesn't change the fact that every person will have a moment with God at the cross. That moment will come one day. And I hope and pray when it does, you take the time to ask the most important question of the world. Not whether the church is true, but rather, who is Jesus to me and can I trust him? As Jesus himself said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. A powerful tie to this is also in 1 John 5:13, which reinforces the assurance of eternal life through Jesus Christ. I write these things to you that who believe in the name of the Son of God, that you may know that you have eternal life. And so with that, I just encourage everyone to look at Jesus Christ in a point of view that if you haven't looked at him as like what the church put us, I mean, it's like giving us a different version of him. I would say definitely look at Jesus Christ, give him a chance because he died for you. And so if you're not there yet, that's okay. Everyone has a walk with Christ, like I said. And I just fully respect everyone's opinion on how they come to the cross, but at the same time, it's inevitable. And so I just want to share, like, thank you so much, Kai, for having me, because like I really appreciate sharing my story. And I really like hearing other people's stories, and that's why I agreed to do this. Because I think I shared it in Spanish because I speak butchered Spanish, but I speak Spanish. And I wanted to share in English, in my native tongue, right? What I speak, that's my first language. And so I'm just so appreciative of the platform because I can share it with at least, like you said, one person. And that's my main goal. And so I'm grateful for that. And God bless everybody. So
Yeah, definitely. I'm not going to add too much to this because Annalisa, that was beautiful.
thanks.
It really is through Jesus. It really is. And strip back all the stuff. Strip back all the Mormon stuff. Focus on Jesus, and there is so much hope and healing that comes from that. All right, this was great. This was really, really good. Share it with some friends. If you listen to this, share it. And I love you guys. Reach out to me through email if you'd like at jesusformormons@gmail.com. I love receiving those. And thanks a lot, Annalisa, for coming on
Yeah.
the podcast.
Thank you so much.